Being so early in my composing career and during these COVID times, it's rare to have my music performed live by real musicians. These past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to write my first string quartet work for some musicians at my university. This work was for my semester composition project, but I still treated it like I was commissioned to write it. There will be timestamps in the description below if you want to skip to the different stages of the project, but I suggest watching the video all the way through so you can really understand the process behind a big project like this. During this video, I'm going to cover how I approach writing this 7-minute work, to running rehearsals and ultimately recording it. If you're a musician or composer, or really anyone, I'm sure you'll find this video a little bit interesting and see the journey I went on. And if you're new to the channel, I'm Carlos, a music composition major in college. I create insightful videos on both composing and productivity, so if you find this video entertaining or informative, please consider subscribing to get the latest videos right in your feed. But anyways, let's get started with the first stage of the project. So what's up guys, I'm going to be trying to work on this new string quartet. I'm going to be doing some sketches on piano and then writing them down on some staff paper here, so hopefully you enjoy the process and I'll try to keep you up to date on what I'm thinking out loud. So here we go. Many of my pieces begin with sketches that I take on manuscript paper at the piano. It was late September when I started writing the piece, so I knew right away that I wanted to incorporate the fall season as a part of the theme. Eventually, the idea turned into a multi-movement seasons theme for each of the 4 seasons. This piece was only one movement, titled Autumn, which is my favorite time of year. The first sketches of this piece didn't resonate with me, nor could I see any development from it. This happens a lot when I'm writing a new piece. I can run with an original idea, but then scrap it a few days later, after trying to extract all of its potential. So after much contemplation and dyeing my hair, I realized that this form wasn't really working for me. The sketches didn't really seem like it was going anywhere, and I couldn't get past the first starting blocks of writing the piece, so I kind of started from scratch and started the piece off a little bit differently, so I'll show you some of the first sketches I had. But I salvaged some of the ideas from the first sketch and incorporated it into a new idea that would eventually sprout into the final piece a few weeks later. The score began more sparsely but light in texture. The whole idea was to capture the calm and ethereal soul of the season. With the feedback of my composition teacher and some Pinterest, the piece finally began writing itself. A week later, I wrote over 2/3 of the piece, and I was nearing completion of the work. After another week, I finished the piece and was ready to distribute it to the players. Speaking of which, I luckily knew some of the string players from my music theory class, so I got my team assembled even before I started writing the piece. Properly dubbed the String Quartet Gang, I kept in communication with the fantastic players that would premiere the work, but first, we had to rehearse. Being my first time seriously collaborating with performers and taking care of the logistics of this project, I had to schedule 4 rehearsals before we recorded. It was difficult to find times to rehearse and even reserve rehearsal spaces leading up to the premiere date. Often our schedules would clash or other urgent matters popped up at the last minute, but we managed to have 4 productive rehearsals at about 40 minutes each. Make sure to check in for a future video that I'll be releasing soon about scheduling and running effective rehearsals, because I learned a lot about that throughout this project. The players were given parts about 2 weeks before the first rehearsal, and a MIDI realization so that we could hit the ground running from the first sight reading of the piece. The purpose of the first rehearsal was to get used to the style and flow of the piece, and to find trouble spots that we would focus on in later rehearsals. I brought my tactile piccolo metronome, my score, and my conductor's baton. Not that a baton is necessary in a chamber setting, other than it was super fun to use. After running through the piece once, the players knew what sections needed the most attention, and how the different elements of the piece worked together. The second rehearsal was really when the parts started locking in better. I focused more on the beginning and middle section, and clarified some notational markings, and gave suggestions of phrasing and texture. That was a lot better there. Yeah, I remember last time we were kind of jumping the gun there, but that was a lot better. In the third rehearsal, I focused on the quick and syncopated section at rehearsal letter K. We started out slowly with the metronome, and then went up to a reasonable tempo that I preferred than the one I'd written. We eventually stopped using the metronome, and the players began to rely on listening to each other and keeping a steady pulse. The sudden tempo change into that section was something that we struggled with, but eventually smoothed out. The fourth rehearsal consisted of cleaning up trouble spots and running through the piece once or twice to mimic the recording we'd take the following night. I arrived at the recital hall I reserved and cleared off the stage for the performance. Of course, it was just a recording and there was no live audience. I set up the camera, tripod, laptop, and my bootleg microphone solution and recorded the piece 3 times. I wasn't used to the acoustics of the space we were in until running through the piece twice. I'm not used to working with string instruments as much as I do with winds, so it was definitely an eye-opening experience, as they don't project as loudly in a chamber setting. But the microphone picked up the instruments pretty well, along with the rustle of my coat. Whatever the case, I finally premiered the piece and was simply overjoyed. The players did a great job and I couldn't thank them enough. Still being a growing composer, I seldom hear my own music performed live, let alone conducting it myself, so this was a memorable experience that I'll cherish years from now. I hope you enjoyed the journey I went on with this project, and hopefully watching the process inspires you to undertake your own musical projects in the near future. If you'd like to watch the full recording of this piece, or even purchase it to play in your own string quartet, those will be linked down below. So here's what I took away from this project. Alright guys, we did it. So it was an amazing journey that I went on. This project was fantastic and I had a blast going through the entire process. Some things I learned along the way. Number one, there are a lot more logistics involved than you might think with this project, from reserving rehearsal spaces to actually scheduling the rehearsals, to getting the music out to the players and all those sorts of little things in the background. Those are super important and they pile up on top of each other. So I wasn't prepared for that, but I think I found my way around it. The second thing, again, I don't really have my pieces performed live at this moment very frequently. So hearing it performed live compared to the MIDI realization is just like, it was insane and really cool to hear, real players and actual acoustic instruments performing my piece, and in the recital hall it sounded fantastic. So if you can get your music performed by live players, by all means go for it. It's really eye-opening and 100% better than what you can hear on a MIDI realization. The third takeaway had to do, I don't know if it's a takeaway, but it was interesting to see how we did this entire project through COVID and all the guidelines we had to follow. Specifically for string instruments, it's not that bad. They can wear a mask the entire time along with me, because it's not really aerosol producing, to play a string instrument. If I had like a woodwind quintet, which is the next piece I'm writing, it might be a little more difficult to approach that because you have wind instruments blowing around, aerosols and all that nasty stuff. So I think it was a good call to do a string quartet for my semester project, and it just made the most sense during these crazy times. And lastly, just the euphoria and joy that I felt hearing my music performed, it just moved me. The players were fantastic, like I said, and if you can get your piece performed at your school, or if you know any other musicians that can perform it, I think it's a really enriching experience because it'll really inspire you to continue writing, and knowing you have to write for real musicians, not just instruments or different parts. I think it'll inspire you, and that's probably the biggest takeaway I got from this project. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos on composing and or productivity tips, go ahead and subscribe down below. I'll be posting as frequently as I can, and I'd like to make more videos just like this. But anyways guys, thanks for watching and keep writing.